David Lichtenstein, and welcome to the Yeshiva Shalmala. This week's program will be about Churban. From Detroit, we will have Rav Shmuel Irons, the Rav and historian, will be speaking about the Churban. From New York, we will have Rabbi Yaakov Feitman, his discussions with Rav Hutner about the Holocaust. And we will have Rabbi Aryeh Lebowitz, rebuilding after Churban. Last week, we got hundreds of calls and emails, many from callers who wanted us to do a follow-up. They wanted to have one or two more Hasidic Chabad to explain the Rabbi's position. And we will have those fakert from Bnei Brak, etc., who felt that, Rav Shach's position of what a gadol is, etc., were not fully explained. So we will do a follow-up next week. But for this week, I felt it was more appropriate to speak about a Tisha B'Av topic. Before we begin, I want to say a vart, as usual, about this week, about the times we're going through. So we say, Eicha Yoshva Badad. How, alas, she's sitting so alone. And Chazal say something interesting. They say, Medrash Rabbah Eicha, it started with Ayeka. Right? God asked Adam Arishan, Ayeka, v'yemelekim Ayeka, where are you? V'yikra Hashem Elokim el Adam, v'yomer lo Ayeka. Ayeka is spelled Aleph Yud Chaf Hey, the same Isias as Eicha. So it says it started with Ayeka, where are you? It became Eicha Esel Levadi Tirchacham U'Mesachem in this week's Parsha, where are you? And it continues naturally, why am I all alone carrying the tzibur? The Ayeka turns into Eicha, and ultimately it turns into Eicha Yoshva Badad. Chazal are telling us something powerful, that the lack of connectivity, communication, empathy, caring, connectedness, which represents Ayeka, turns into Eicha Esel Levadi, where as communally you have one Svi Glock, etc., carrying the whole oil of the tzibur, and this breakage of the linkage turns into ultimately into Eicha Yoshva Badad. I want to shtel ha'ara. After Rabbi Shalom puts Adam Arishan in Gan Eden, he gives him every possible thing. I mean, it's more beautiful than the botanical gardens. He has parnasa, health, every imaginable thing. He says one thing. Don't eat from the Eitz Hadas, right? One command, right away, the same day, he breaks the one command. And what does Rabbi Shalom's ask him? Ayeka, where are you? Which Chazal say this is the essence of the breakage. I don't understand. After all the Rabbi Shalom did for Adam, I mean, from my years in yeshiva, I could think of some other choice words besides Ayeka, where are you? He could have said, cheater, ganif, well, here's a favorite, mechutzef, Ayeka, like that's the question, like that's the reprimand, Ayeka, Eicha. He should have said, ingrate, kafui toiv, shegitz. I mean, all these, choice words. What's Ayeka? It seems so off the point and almost weak. Ayeka? And I want to share with you, I think it's a powerful thought. And I'll say both halacha and agada. When a child runs away from home, when kids run away from home, the parents don't care about what they did. The kid, where are you? Why did you leave the home? Why aren't you here? When an angry spouse leaves the home, the other part doesn't care anymore what you did. We should stay and talk about it. We should communicate. You never walk out the door. Doesn't matter what you did. Let's sit here together and discuss it. Let's make new memories. Let's forgive each other. In the Yud Gimel Midas Harachmim, which are about love, the Yud Rechimta, about forgiveness, love. The first one is Hashem, Kel Racham Lachanan, according to most Rishonim. So the first Hashem is Kaidem Achet. And the second Yud Kei Vav Kei, the exact same Hashem, is after the Chet. So the first one is, I am the God who created you, and therefore I love you, etc., etc. What's the second Hashem? It sounds like a stutter. Like, na. Like, well, what's Hashem? So the Mefarshim explain, Nafshachayim, Berubam, he says the second Hashem is Ani Hashem Lo Shinisi. The exact same Yud Kei Vav Kei that we had before the rupture that I created you with? Yeah, you did something really, 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 really wrong, but you know what? It's Hashem. The second midah of Rachmim is, but nothing's changed. We're all imperfect, right? God created, Hashem created tshuva before He created man, right? Ain't tzaddik baritz asheyasa toivel yechta. Zayin people tzaddik v'kam. What's the point? The point is we were man, we're basav adam. So I understand you would mess up. Nothing has changed. That's the second. The second of the midas harachmim is recognized. Yeah, you're human, and we're still the same. So the question is, Ayeka, why did you turn around? Why did you hide? Why did you run away? Stay here. We're human. I'm human. You're human. You make mistakes. You did, but greater than shegitz, mechutzif, in great questions, Ayeka, why did you leave? Why didn't you stick around? Halacha, here's an interesting thing. Because, when you say drush, you want it to be eiskalt, halachically. What's the halacha? Woman married. Her husband, Rahman al-Litzlan, dies, and she falls for yibum in front of a mummer. One brother was a tzaddik, he was the best bacher in yeshiva. The other brother, mamish akaifa mishumid, oichel nevelos treifes anyim kippah shechal b'shabbos b'fahesya. She falls to him. Is it considered the brother? Kiyeshu achim yachdav? Are they still considered brothers? So it's machlokes. Rashi holds, and other Rishonim, doesn't matter. Yisrael, he always remains a Yisrael, and there's always a din of Kiyeshu Achim Yachdav. They're brothers together, and there's Zaykik V'yibam. And his Kedushin is a Kedushin. And there's Rabbeinu Ephraim, there's this Rishonim argue, and the Shulchan Aruch brings it, and it's more Shulchan Aruch, the Vashon of Shos, he says, there are those who hold that his Kedushin is not Kedushin, he's not Zaykik V'yibam, the Loi Nehira. It's incorrect, doesn't seem that way, and that's halacha how we paskin. You could do the worst things. Your kedushin is a kedushin. It's called kiyeshvu achim yachdav. Your brothers together. You can't lose the brotherhood. So the child who leaves, banim atam Hashem alekechem. What is Rabbi Shalom's question? Not why did you do it? How did you do it? How did you steal from me? Ate from me? Ate hadas to a mitzvah mechutzav? No, Ayeka. Why did you leave? You're still my son. You're still my brother. You're still my spouse. I love you. Ayeka, where did you go? Halachically, I heard a story years ago. I think I've said it before, but I think it's a good story. This child goes OTD off the derech, starts using opioids, becomes a druggie, leaves home. Years later, I don't know, goes to the West Coast, the East Coast. This actually happened. My father was a Rav in Shul. A girl left home for many, many years. She disappeared. And the balabas in Shul came to my father. My father's the Rav. What should I do? She's hanging out in Berkeley with the hippies. My father didn't know what to say. He said, see if you could get the local Chabad shliach to. The kids, years later, the shliach found her. He got her re-inspired. She came back home. So this kid goes away home, far away. And years later, he dries out. He loses the drugs, takes the train back home, hasn't seen his mother in maybe 10 years or 8 years. And he's outside. He comes home. The train drops him off at 11 o'clock at night, walks the distance. It's already 12, 1 o'clock in the morning. He wants to go in, to sleep at home. The light is on in front. Goes to the doorway, doesn't know what to do. She doesn't have a key. Just check. He checks the door, and the door is open. So he opens the door quietly, creaks open the door. He says, oh my goodness. The night I come home, it looks like there's a robber in the house. So he says, I better arm myself. He goes into the kitchen, knows where the kitchen, opens open drawer, takes out a knife, starts walking around the house, starts walking up the steps. The step is creaking. Suddenly he hears his mother say, who's there? And he says, it's me. I think there's a robber in the house. So his mother says, why? It's because the door is open. So his mother says to him, Shefala, it's 9 years since you left. Every night I've slept for 9 years with the door open, hoping you would come home. Right? So what does Rabbi Shalom say when man does the most grievous imaginable thing? The same day that he creates, Rabbi Shalom comes from the The Lamim to create in this Nitzchias, this one time. The ingrate, what does he say? Ayeka. Why did you leave? Don't stay here. Let's talk. We could work it out. Whatever relationship we're in, no matter how ugly it gets, we should learn from the Rabbi Shalom's question. Ayeka, don't turn away. Talk to me. I'm lonely. I need you. Talk to me. I love you. Ayeka. Let's go to our riddle of the week. So this week I'm going to ask a political riddle because I know some of the Elam here likes politics. In Parshas Veschanan is the Isser of Loi Sechanim, right? And it's brought lahalacha in the end of Kuf Nun Aleph, and end of first in Hilchos Oived Kechavim. Osur l'saper b'shvachan. You're not allowed to say of the Oived Kechavim. You're not allowed to say the shvach. Afilu loimer kameno Oived Kechavim ze b'tzurasei als Loi Sechanim. Don't give them. Don't make chen. Kal v'chaymish yisaper b'shvach maisav. Don't say his ma'aseh magud, or say something he said was wise. Right? The question is, political question. You open up an Allgemeine Journal. The Yid doesn't get better than that. The Mishpacha, Kodesh Kadashim, right? The Yated, the Hamodia. Pick your favorite. What are you going to find on the front cover this week? Some glorious attribute of our President Trump. So my riddle of the week is, when the Shulchan Aruch says, Osir l'saper b'shvach maisa, forget about the person, even some good deed he does, als der Isser of Loi Sechanim. Right? How do we explain this stira? And it's not a current thing, this has been going on for generations, right? How do we explain it? That's riddle number one. I'm going to ask a few riddles because I think we may have discussed that. Here's another one. Leisachmoid eishes reyecha. Leisachmoid. Don't covet, which Rambam means to do something to take eishes reyecha. Leisisave Bais reyecha. Don't desire Bais reyecha sederlav. So the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvahs, Mitzvah Reish Samach Vav. So it says, tell you, and Ein Gzela, he says there's really two Isurim that merge. The ultimate one is it has to be a Maisa. You have to take your friend's field. The Ravid argues. Rambam says the Isser is when you actually when you sort of force your friend, you make him crazy till he sells you his shoyer, his chamoyer, his field. You're over on leisachmaid. It requires to take it, and it's also leisasavet. The coveting, the desire leads to taking beis reyecha, etc. And the famous Ravid argues. He says, okay, that it doesn't require taking, etc. But here's the question. Bishlama to take your friend's field, house, shoyer, means I pay you money, the Rambam says, but you pushed him to do it. So that's over loisachmaid. But on your friend's wife, manashach, the only way to be over the issa is al yidei kedushin, right? Eishes reach, to take her. The kedushin could only come after he divorced her. Once he divorced her, it's not his wife anymore. If it's not his wife anymore, I can't be over loisachmaid. So bishlama by shoyer, chamoyer, sadeh, you have the shaila of loisachmaid. By eishes reacha, how do you have the shaila, the isser of loisachmaid? And I will ask one more riddle. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And Shulchan Aruch Paskins in Siman Samach Vav Gimel, that you're not allowed to be mafsik in the psukim, except for Kaddish, Kedushu, Baruchu, mafsik afilu be'emtza ha'pasik. So you're saying Shema, middle of a pasuk, yeah, Kaddish, you say Amen Yehei Rabba. You don't say the last Amens of the end, but Amen Yehei Rabba you say. I don't understand. There's a klal in halacha, oisik b'mitzvah patim and a mitzvah. When you're saying Kriya Shema, it's a mitzvah saseh of to say Shema every day, pamayim, right? And Kabbalah Samach Shabayim, etc. Somebody says Kaddish. You say, listen, thank you very much for saying Kaddish, for saying Kedusha. There's a halacha, oisik b'mitzvah, patim and a mitzvah. By the way, people don't realize this. If you're in the middle of davening and a mashulach comes over, Shulchan Aruch says, the Mishnah brings it in, he brings it, I think, in Hilchos Kriyas HaTorah, that you're not supposed to be mafsik to give him money, because oisik b'mitzvah, patim and a mitzvah. So if oisik b'mitzvah, patim and a mitzvah, Why, when you're saying by Kriya Shema, you mafsik for Kaddish and Kedusha? That is our third riddle of the week. Let's go to our wonderful guests.
We have with us Harav Shmuel Irons, the head of the Kollel of Greater Detroit. He'll give us a little bit of a background of the history and some Divrei Hisoyrus reference to Tisha B'Av. Welcome, Rabbi Irons.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure all of you are familiar with the Gemara in Yuma and Talmid Bais, where the Gemara asks the question, why was the Bais Rishon, why was the first Beis Hamikdash destroyed? And the Gemara answers, because of the Shalosh Hamoros, because of the three cardinal sins, Avodah Zorah, Gilui Arayah, Shvichas Damim, idolatry, immorality, says murder. Then the Gemara goes on and brings psukim, brings proof texts to each one of these causes. Then the Gemara goes on to ask the question, but what was the reason that the second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed? After all, there were oisik b'Torah uva mitzvahs ugemilas chasadim. And then the Gemara answers, because of sinas chinam. And this teaches us that sinas chinam shkula is the equivalent of the three chamuris, of the three cardinal sins. There are several difficulties with this Gemara, even though you're all familiar with this. Many of them are historical difficulties. One of them is the idea that the Beis Hamikdash, in the time of the Bais Rishon, you get the impression that they weren't oisik b'Torah, avodah gemilas chasadim. And yet, from the sources from the Gemara itself, it seems that the level of Torah during the first Beis Hamikdash would seem to be infinitely greater than the later generations. There's a Gemara in Ksubas and Kuvav Amud Aleph that says about in the time of Elisha. And Elisha lived in Yisrael, was a northern kingdom, where in his time it was the reigning kings who were from the dynasty of Omri. Yaakov had introduced, with Izebel, introduced the Avodas Habal. Izebel was roidif, pursued and killed the Nevi'ei Hashem. And yet, during this time, the Gemara says that Elisha had 2,200 Talmidim that stood the whole year with him. And in contrast, during the time, a later period, by Rav only had 1,200 Talmidim. They were there with him the whole year. Rav Huna had 800 Talmidim with him the whole year. I mean, this is in the worst situation, but they were learning Torah. And we know in later generations, in better times, even Yirmiyahu, who's being Meichiach, who's castigating Klal Yisrael, he says, Teif siyat Torah lo yaduni. Those who grab the Torah don't know me. They're not fully sincere. But evidently there was much asik b'Torah. So that's one thing that has to be understood. I mean, in addition, actually, there's a Gemara in Nedorim and Pei Aleph that regarding the Pasuk that Ma'os is over the Oretz. Yirmiyahu says, why was the land destroyed? And he says it was a mystery to them because of the Torah. And the Gemara answers, the problem was they learned Torah, but they didn't do it with a bracha beforehand. And the Ran, the Rebbeinu Nisim quotes the Rebbeinu Yoina, is indicative they didn't learn Torah Lishma. But evidently they were oisik b'Torah. So that's one thing that has to be understood. Another thing that has to be understood is the impression of that Gemara is that sinas chinam itself is enough of a reason for the Beis Hamikdash to be destroyed. There's a Gemara in Shabbos in Lamed Beis Amud Beis that deals with various averos and the stringency, the choimer of these averos and the punishment. And it starts off with sinas chinam. And it says sinas chinam is an avera that one is punished, that there's meriva v'teich beisa, it creates contentiousness within a family. It says Isham Mapel Rachman Mapelis Nefolim. It creates miscarriages. That children die when they're young, and then it goes on different averas, and finally it gets to Shvichas Domim. For that, the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed. It goes on because of Avodah Zorah and Gilei Arayos, and the fact they don't keep Shemitah. You didn't go into Galus. But it seems that the sin of Sinas Chinam is a personal avera. Only later on, by Shvichas Domim, there's a whole ummah, the whole nation is accountable. Avodah Zorah, Gilei Arayos. It seems that Sinas Chinam doesn't carry with it the same chaimer, doesn't carry with the same severity. And yet the Gemara and Yuma seems to equate the two. So how do you understand that? The third difficulty is that the impression of the Gemara is that during the second Beis Hamikdash, there was no Shvichas Domim. I mean, we know there's no Avodah Zorah. There's no Shvichas Domim. And yet from the historical sources, it would seem to be the Shvichas Domim in the second period of the second Beis was much greater than the first Beis Hamikdash. We know Gufa from the Gemara speaks about in Samravov and Kedushin, where Yanai Hamel killed out all the Rabbanan. And we know later on in Bava Basra and Abdallah, it says Hurdis killed off all the Rabbanan. And we know from historical sources, from Josephus, about the Yanai, it was the second Yanai, that killed thousands and thousands of Yidden. You know, and close to the time of the Churban, we know from his source about the Sikari, this is like the Bar Yonim, who were murderers. So why can the Gemara say that the second Beis Hamikdash was so much greater than the first Beis Hamikdash? And it would seem to be that the teretz is that the Gemara explains in Shabbos and Daf Nun Hey that there were great tzaddikim at the time of the first Beis Hamikdash, but they weren't moichiach, they didn't rebuke those who were the Bali Avera, those who did sin. And because of their lack of rebukes, is their nitzvus b'avoin ador, they themselves are held responsible. And there's another Gemara in Shabbos and Kuf Yotes Amud Beis. It says that one of the ills was Yerushalayim was destroyed, that they didn't give rebuke, they didn't give musar one to the other. It would seem, though, that problem didn't exist in the second Beis Hamikdash. And that's why those who were oisik b'Torah and gemilas chasadim and avoida were not held responsible for the ills of the others. In fact, if we see from historical sources, from non-Jewish sources of the time, when they speak of the Pharisees, the Prushim, it's always in relation to the Teichacha, says the rebuke they're giving those who are not fulfilling the Torah. So it seems Teichacha was not their problem. Their problem seems to be another one, and really that brings us to what the idea of Sinas Chinam is. And there's much said about the Sinas Chinam. But if you learn the Gemara, to whom did these, it seems those who are Oisik B'Torah and Avodah and Gemilas Hasadim, their Avodah Mitzvahs, they were the ones who had Sinas Chinam. To whom did they have Sinas Chinam? After all, says there's a Mishnah in Yevomas and Yud Gimel Beis that speaks about Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, that we know is disagreed on. There are on hundreds of issues, and sometimes it was very impassioned. And yet the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, Ava v'Achva, between them, they intermarried in between each other. So who is the Sinas Chinam to? And it would seem to be that the Sinas Chinam they were talking about was not directed to other of the Chaverim. I mean, they seem to, the Gemara in Sanhedrin Chav Daled speaks about how the Talmid Chacham and Eretz Yisrael are so ne'imim, they're so pleasant one to the other. It seems the problem was to the Ameoritz, to the Rishoyim. And again, the question is, why did they have Sinas Chinam then? They were such exemplary people, such Talmid Chachamim. Oisig and Gemilas Chasadim. And it would seem, as the answer really stems from this interesting Gemara in Psachim, in Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Beis. where the Gemara says that if you see someone who does a dvar avera, see something that's wrong, you're mechiach him, and he knows that it's wrong, and he still does this. You're allowed. You can't, since you're only an eid echad, you can't tell Besdin. But says you're allowed to hate the person. In the Rav, you're allowed to hate them. According to Nachman Bar Yisrael, it's a mitzvah to hate such a person. And Tosfos explains, says based on this Gemara, he says, however, if you see someone who is worthy of being hated, and based on the Gemara in Bava Metzia and Beis on Beis, you see that he's worthy of being hated. But naturally, the person who is the object of your richuk, of your hatred, is going to hate you back. It's in a kamayim ponim al ponim. Because there's a pasuk in Mishla, is a Gemara in Kuf Yud Zayin in Yuvamis. And Mamela says, once that person hates you, you naturally feel uncomfortable and will hate him back again. That secondary hatred is already a personal hatred. And that hatred is you're not allowed to have. To the extent of there are two people, one who's at least this is how Tosfos understands it. There are two people in need. One is he's carrying a load to market and the load has fallen off. The animal is not in distress. The other one is that the animal still has the load and the animal's in distress. It's being pained. It could be harmed. Normally, you help the one that the animal is in distress. However, in a situation that the one whose animal is distress is your friend, and the one who is not in distress is your enemy, and Tosfos explains your enemy means the one you're allowed to hate. You should still go and help your enemy, says, because to get rid of the hatred that you have. Even though you would be allowed to hate him, but there's always this extra level of hatred, that secondary level of hatred. And that secondary level of hatred is really, that's not allowed. You have to get rid of that. It would seem, perhaps, if that's the case, that we're speaking about the Talmid Chacham of the door, who were the object of untold hatred. The Gemara in Psachim and Memtes on Bais describes the hatred the Amoritz have for Talmid Chachamim. About the sakona, the danger a Talmid Chacham is in being in the presence of an Amoritz. The Rabbi Akiva, the great Rabbi Akiva, who was a tremendous Baal Midas even when he was an Amoritz, said, if I had, at that time in my life, if I would have seen the Talmid Chacham, I would have bitten him, says, like a donkey, says, bites a... This it would bite a person. It would break the bones. I was so angry at them. And Tosfos and Ksubas and Samach Beis on Beis explains, because he understood the fact that they were Perushim and they were Porish from the Amoritz, says that they separated themselves. They viewed it, he and probably the others amongst him, has viewed it as a sign of arrogance, that they're looking down at us. And as a result, there was tremendous ill will and hatred. Well, the Talmid Chacham, that generation, the object of all that hatred, would be understood, at least according to Tosfos and Psachim, that they themselves would have similar feelings. And if that's the case, that was the Sinas Chinam. The Sinas Chinam that we're talking about is really the Sinas Chinam where it's not totally unwarranted, where there were reason to rationalize why you should have a Sinah. Says these are people, they're not Nizra mitzvahs. There's a Gemara in Brachas and Mem Zayin and Beis that speaks about the lack of total commitment to mitzvahs that the Amoritz, the unlearned had. Says there were certain grounds one could rationalize it, but it went beyond. It became personal. That was the Sinas Chinam. If that's the case, one could now understand, perhaps, why is it then that Sinas Chinam is the cause of destruction of the Beis Hamikdash? Because after all, as we point out from the Gemara in Shabbos, Amud Beis, Avodas Sinas Chinam is an Avera, but doesn't seem to warrant to have that same chomer, the same harshness that to warrant a Churban Beis Hamikdash. The Malbim explains in his Pirush on Daniel the B'emes, the original Churban Beis Hamikdash, and the cause of the Churban Beis Hamikdash was not alleviated totally after 70 years. Really, that's why it was Basher that there should be 420 years, an addition of the second Bais, and it was not meant to last more than that. This Mavur, there's a Gemara in Nozer Lamed Beis, Lamed Beis. It wasn't designed to last more. It was to be, says that through those years, and it was years mostly of Galus and mostly of suffering, that they should have a complete kapora for the original averas that caused the Churban Bais Rishon. If that's the case, and that that whole tkufa, it was a tkufa for them to do tshuva for the original averas. So the question is, if they had such Talmid Chachamim, such tzaddikim in the door, why weren't those tzaddikim mashpia on the door? Why didn't it cause the total, the correction, the tikkuns of all of what was caused originally? And it would seem because of the sinus chinam, says that they would no longer be able to have that hashpah on the people. I mean, ultimately, says it's only because of the ava that they feel, says that they're going to be changed. And Ozavas Reb Nosson and Perikut Bais to speak how Aaron, the famous member of Hillel, that one should be, says that there should be Oyev Shalom, Roidev Shalom, Oyev Sabrias and Mekarvan L'Torah. The fact is that Aaron was an Oyev Shalom, that he was Oyev Sabrias. Everyone felt that Aaron was his friend, and that itself, it was beneath their dignity to sin. They felt as they were connected to Aaron. If the people as a whole, who we know from Josephus, respected Talmid Chachamim, and they looked in terms of that they were the representatives of the Das Hashem, of what Torah is. But if they would have despite all of the terrible nisyonis of being hated, but if they would have been like Hillel, they would have turned around and seen the whole generation. They gave teichacha, but they had responsibility because they needed to have, in order to forgive that teichacha, the people had to feel that feeling of ava. That's why Hillel really lived. He flourished in the last century before the Churban. He died 60 years before the Churban. It was his memories that he saw what was coming. He says that this is the dogish that one has to have. Says this avas habrius u'mekarvan l'Torah. And in a sense, one can understand then that which is the asses, the Gemara says they couldn't understand why the Churban happened by the Bais Rishon. And this is the answer. They didn't learn Torah Lishma. Perhaps we could understand that as well. Because why didn't they have a hashpah? They didn't give teichacha, it's true. But they should have had hashpah on all the people. Why weren't they like Aaron HaKohen? And the answer is that that which you say says that that which attracts a Talmid Chacham is because it says Kollel Torah Lishmo Zoich L'Dvorim Harbe Nikra Oyev Ohuv. He becomes beloved because the Torah creates the Torah Lishmo that he has creates him. He becomes another person. There's a magnetism, but if they learn Torah Shaloi Lishmo, it doesn't have that magnetism. And that's why they weren't able to mashpia on the door. You know, if that's the case, really, then what we're saying here is that the Churban really came about. They were great people, but they had, in a sense, a responsibility for the door. And had they had that sense of avas habrius, this is Hillel's memory, says oivas habrius mekarvan l'Torah, says our history would have been different. Says now, it says we're holding Baruch Hashem. We've seen a whole renaissance of a commitment to limud haTorah, says diktuk b'mitzvos. Baruch Hashem, we've seen in our whole generation, but there's unfortunately, says so many that aren't touched by this. And perhaps there's only every individual is limited to what he can do. However, it says that we took the member of Hillel to Oyev Shalom, Roidev Shalom, Oyev Abrius and Mekarvan L'Torah, and we took it and it says that it would create a certain magnetism that beyond what we learn, what we do, it says, well, it has an effect, it says, in a much broader and a wider area. And Amir Hashem, Eibusha Zolhelfen, says that in the schus of all that we do, in the Limud HaTorah, and the mitzvahs, and the Avos HaBrius, says Amir Hashem, we should be zeicher for the Gula Shleimim Her B'Yameinu Amen. Kol Tov.
We have the honor of having with us on the phone the Rav of Kehilas Bais, Yehuda Tzvi in Cedarhurst. He's also a Talmid of the Rosh of Chaim Berlin, of Rav Hutner Zechron Levracha. He's a well-known writer for Mishpacha. He's written many books and Sfarim. He's written far back as the Jewish Observer. He's a Musmach of Reb Moshe, a Musramach of Rav Gifta, Rabbi Yaakov Feitman from the Five Towns. Welcome.
Shalom Aleichem, a pleasure.
Rav Feitman, you wrote an article in a sefer called The Path Through the Ashes of a speech that Rav Hutner Zechron Levracha gave at a convention of Menalim and Mechanchem, Aryeh, the Toradika Hashkafa towards the Holocaust. And I understand that you didn't just write it as one of the listeners, but Rav Hutner called you in, he was mamana you to write it, and he sat with you privately, read what you wrote, commented on it before it was published. Is that so?
Yeah, that's absolutely so. I would like to also give some credit to Rabbi Chaim Feitman Zatzal, just recently passed away, who wrote the first draft. And then you're right, the Rosh Hashiva called me in, and I'm both proud to say, but at the time it was incredible. I spent 7 hours with him writing it together.
So could you relate to us the question? What was his hashkafa? How could so many Erlacha, Kedoshim, 1.5 million children. What is Hashkafa? How could that happen to us?
Right. So that's a very good question. His, in short, because it's quite a long, it was a long presentation and it's a long article, and the follow-up is long. So I'll give you the essence. The Shiva Zatzal was not happy with the terms Shoah and Holocaust because he felt that separates it from Jewish history. So he preferred, and he actually was the one that I think coined the term Churban Europa, and that was his term of choice, because it places that tremendous tragedy in the context of what he called Yiddish Yisurim, Jewish suffering. And what he explained was that periodically there's a thing that descends upon Klal Yisrael called the Teichacha. The first Teichacha, the second Teichacha is B'chutoisai Kisavai, or in this case he felt it was Nitzavim Vayelach, by the way. And there's no explaining any one aspect of Churban because the totality is what eventually, in the Jewish eschatology, the way that we look at the entire history of Am Yisrael, it includes both suffering, Galus, and Geula. That's the essence of the entire article.
And why does this occur? So it's part of, well, it's part of, in perspective, it's part of the whole mahalach of the Nitzias of Klal Yisrael, but to somebody who lost siblings, parents, children, how do you explain it? Okay, so it's in the Teichacha and it happens, and therefore...
Right. So he explained as follows. It's interesting that after he spoke, there was widespread misunderstanding of one thing. People thought that he was saying that the Holocaust, let's just use the term for a moment because it's the most common term, the Holocaust happened because of various sins. There were Gedolim that said that, and in fact some of the Gedolim that you mentioned that I was close to held like that. Rav Hutner did not hold like that. He held that, I'll just say the Yiddish, Salit of Yiddish places. He said it's resting on Klal Yisrael's shoulders that this is how we get to the final denouement of and I think he even used the French term, to the final geula. So Galus includes suffering, but there's always a reason. So what is the reason? So he did declare, mostly at the second time that he spoke about this, what he called the Chazara Shir, that there had been a slow decline of Klal Yisrael from the time of the Hakollel, roughly a 200-year period, and one of the reasons that the Holocaust / Korban Europa came from Germany is because the Hakollel started in Germany. So when you talk about people that, and he was, by the way, very, very strong about not saying this to survivors necessarily. He told me that when I speak to an audience, if there are survivors there, don't talk about chas v'shalom, tit for tat, or even punishment. He didn't believe that this was a punishment. It was an einish. But it came to Klal Yisrael, like it says in the Torah, in the both Teichachas, but again, the pasuk in the Vayelech Teichacha goes like this: Hilcha Sheichei v'Mavisecha. Hakadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu, "V'kama am hazeh v'zon acharei eleinecha aretz." This nation will fall into the lure of the Gentiles. V'starti panei mehem. I will hide my face. So this is what many have written, that it was Hester Panim. The Holocaust was Hashem hiding his face. But now comes the part that almost nobody else said, to my knowledge. The next two words are frightening, his words, V'hayolecho. They will be consumed by their enemies. Rabbi, terrible things will happen. Then, the Amr B'yaymahu, they will say, who is they will say? Klal Yisrael. Why did this happen to me? Because I did not feel Hashem in my midst. So he said, he called it the Ramban. The Ramban on this pasuk says that there's a thing called a Kehilas tshuva. The Ramban says it's not a complete tshuva, but let me just quote very quickly what he said. So there are three stages of tshuva. If a person says Lo chatasi, that's the worst. Says I didn't sin. That's denial. That's repudiation, and then a person has no connection to tshuva at all. But then when the person no longer says Lo chatasi, that's already something. And that's what this pasuk reflects on. So people that said, where is God? Where was God? That's okay. You're supposed to say that, because that means you're searching for Hashem. And that really, I think, answers what, and he was very solicitous of survivors. He was one of those that used to say, if a person has a number on his arm, just like Rebbe used to say, then you have to stand up for him, you have to ask him for a bracha. So, but he said that survivors emotionally can't deal with any answer to why this happened. So he said you just have to give them a hug, and you have to explain to them that this is Yiddish Tzaris. But he did say that this was the culmination of all of the decline of those 200 years approximately until 1939 to 1945. See, it's nobody's fault in that generation. It's a cumulative effect. And in that he disagreed with a number of the Gedolim of his time that tried to pinpoint and identify a mita connected mita. He didn't agree with that at all.
So, Rabbi Feitman, I have a few questions.
Please.
You know, the Gemara says, so the Gemara says, but without that, ish becheta yumas. So isn't it in Klal Yisrael accepted, the concept of ish becheta yumas, that the cumulative averos of prior generations do not get passed down to children, unless it's oichsin ma'aseh avoseihem b'yadeim, and there were 2 or 3 million fruma Jews killed who weren't oichsin ma'aseh avoseihem b'yadeim. So why were they responsible for the acts of the Hakollel in Germany, or etc.?
Right. So he was very, very careful to say that when there is a Tarsucha that descends upon Klal Yisrael, so you call it one Gemara, so there's another Gemara that says that when the Gemara in Bava Kama Daf Samach, right, going into Daf Samach. Exactly, Eina Mafkin. So this was a Bechina of Eina Mafkin, and it was, some of the Gedolim that were lifted before the Holocaust happened. So he said that was a phenomenon of what the Gemara says at the beginning of that, is that there are tzaddikim that are spared. But after that, once it's happening, so it's Eina Mafkin Mitzadik L'Rasha, because there's something that's happening to the door. So in every door, there are good and there are bad, and the children are always innocent. So see, he was very careful to stress that you can't chas v'sholom pin any averos on anybody in the Holocaust. And on the contrary, he said that the amount of suffering that happened to any one Yid that was in Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, Theresienstadt, or any of the other camps was way beyond even if they were a Bali averos. So it was the totality of the Teichacha, Seliktas Yidna Teichacha. That was his term. And that Teichacha cannot be explained away by Averis, but on the other hand, it can't be ignored by the people that are a part of it. They have to just either be makabel it on their shoulders, or the next door, that's our door, or the door after that, has to say, we understand that this happened as a kapara for the totality of Klal Yisrael's, I don't want to say again Averis, but Klal Yisrael's decline over these 2 centuries or so.
So, Rabbi Feitman, before the war, I think when we look at the pictures of Varsha and et cetera, Europe, it would seem that today the United States is, I think they say that there's 10% of Jews are Shayim B'Shabbos. I don't know if that's accurate, but something like that.
Right.
I would imagine before the war was a far greater number. And they say in Poland it was 50% from, in Hungary it was 70% from. Like certainly maybe the Litta was less. So did the Holocaust, if it was the descent, the decline of Klal Yisrael, I mean, it would seem that today we're in a much worse matzav than we were then. So did we clean the waters? Or do we now have Mayim Solim with a 90-10? Like, how did that help to where we ought to?
Well, listen, I have to go away from the Shiva for a second, even though we're quoting him. But the famous lines of Reb Meir Simcha, the Or Sameach, in his Meshachachma B'Chukaisei. So he's the one that said way before it happened, because Meshachachma was of course published posthumously, but it was written around the year 1900, and he said Yachshav Ki Berlin Yerushalayim. So there was something in Klal Yisrael that said that they were drifting towards a tremendous decline of assimilation. So it doesn't mean that this Gary Yid, by the way, he was a Varshavah Yid. You mentioned Warsaw. He was a Varshavah Yid, and he grew up in a family of Gerach Tzitim, and he saw that greatness. So that's why he never criticized it. So Farkert, he said that there was a bechina of, we're coming up on Tisha B'Av, of Asara Arugei Malchus. Nobody would ever criticize the tzaddikim of the Asara Arugei Malchus of being a part of anything bad, and yet they represented the Yidden that died, Al Kiddush Hashem, at the hands of the Romans. So the Yidden that died at the hands of the Nazis in Achshemam also represented a kapara for the rest of Klal Yisrael. They were the tzaddikim. The Oila is an Oila Tamima. That's really what he felt and what he stated.
So it didn't improve the situation, but it was an Oila.
Absolutely. And he, he was actually quite upset at one of the Gedolim with whom he was close that said, well, they closed the mikvahs after the Yidden stopped keeping Taras and Mishpacha. And he called him up. He told me this himself. In fact, I heard part of the conversation. He said, who made you the Rabbi Shalom CPA? You did the Rabbi Shalom's books. How do you know that? So the Yeshiva was very careful to say that he doesn't know the Rabbi Shalom's books. But at the same time, there's a sense that we were in a process where Kadosh Baruch Hu pushed us towards this Haloi al Ki'ena L'Kai B'Kirbi, where Hitten said, I once heard from one of his Talmidim, the Noviniska Rebbe, Zogazunstein, he actually teaches Holocaust / Churban Europa in his yeshiva in Novominsk. So a Bacher asked him, so wie gewend the Rabbi Shalom in the Churban? And his answer was, to the question, where was God? So his answer was, in Yete Winkel, in every corner. And he said he heard that from his mother-in-law, who was a survivor. So survivors felt the the closeness to Hashem at that point. It was a little bit like the mashal, and I believe he said it, but he didn't say it in this mimer, that when of course the Gemara says that the Babylonians, the Babylonians entered into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and they saw the Kruvim of Ma'urim Zu B'Zu. So the famous Kashi is, how could that be? That when the Kruvim are even facing each other, that means that we're also returning to Shlomakim. And here they're Ma'urim Zu B'Zu. So the answer is that this testified to a very high madrega simultaneous with the low madrega, because Klal Yisrael is one.
So if we were to tell me if I'm extrapolating correctly, he said there was a slow decline of Klal Yisrael for hundreds of years because of Haskalah. And I think that I read someplace, or I heard that when they closed Volozhin, there were 5 groups in Volozhin. There were the Bundists, the Marxists, the Communists, the Balei Musa, and those who were learning. I mean, it infiltrated. That's why I saw it someplace. Yeah. In other words, it infiltrated almost every part of Yiddishkeit. And post-Holocaust, it could be that it's true that we're a greater minority, the Shomer Torah mitzvahs. But on the other hand, the yeshivas we have today are stronger and greater than we've ever had in history. Is that so? In a certain way, it was like a reset and start over, and we have a thriving Yiddishkeit, both America, Israel, England, etc. That we've certainly the amount of Talmid Chachamim, and I mean the loss to off. We talk about off the derech. I think in Lithuania was 80%, and in Poland it was 50%. In America, it's low single digits. So was he in fact saying it was sort of like almost like a restart for Klal Yisrael?
Well, what he was saying was that, and I think everybody agrees that sometime after the Holocaust there was a tshuva movement. Some identify it with 1967 or whatever it was, but in some years there was a restart, and his understanding of that was that the Kadeshei Elyon that did die, Al Kiddush Hashem, and there were so many of them, that the yeshivas, the Rosh yeshivas, the Rebbes, and we say on all of them Hashem Yinkom Daman, so they gave us this kayach of the restart. Yes, absolutely. So there was a restart, but what he was saying primarily was that we have to be very careful not to identify any one, let's call it sinner, but as a dar, so the dar experienced a teichach phenomenon. And nobody today, because we're not so identified, we don't relate emotionally to the Churban Beis Hamikdash as much, although in this time of year we're supposed to, but we don't. So we're not so up in arms. Oh, how come all those thousands of Yidden got killed? And there were probably by each Churban at least 1 million Yidden that got killed, and many, if not most of them, were Kedoshim also. So that was Gzeirah min Hashamayim, and this was Gzeirah min Hashamayim, and he wanted us to understand the concept of Gzeirah min Hashamayim in the totality of context of the Chumash. He said, by the way, he did say that he criticized, even in the former world, the fact that we tend to only focus on the wonderful days, the Yom Tovim, and the Chanukah and Purim and the victories, and the times when I think that we were successful, and not the times of tragedy. He said tragedy, let's face it, is a part of Jewish history.
Feitman, thank you very much. It's an honor to have with us the person who actually wrote down the Shir of Rav Hutner. You said together with him for 7 years, gave us over this Messiah. It was an honor to have you. Meheri Iban Hamikdash.
Amen. Kol tov.
We have with us Rabbi Aryeh Lebowitz, the Rav of North Woodmere. He's also the most prolific speaker on YUTorah.org with over 4,000 shiurim, and who will give us a few divrei hisoyrus and halacha about regarding Tisha B'Av. Welcome, Rabbi Lebowitz.
Thank you very much. One of the things that we're allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av, there is a limited list, but one of the items that we're allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av is the Agaditas related to the Churban HaBais that appears in Maseches Gittin. And the Gemara over there tells a remarkable story of the great Jewish hero of the post-Churban era, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, The Jewish people didn't really know exactly how to react after the Churban, but even as it was happening, they weren't sure what their next move should be, and there was significant debate between the Chachamim and the Baryonim. The Baryonim was this group of thugs, for lack of a better term, who had a different strategy than the Chachamim had, and they thought that they had to fight and that it was that any overtures of peace were not going to work, and the Chachamim thought that they didn't stand a chance to fight. And the Gemara goes through with some detail the episode of how Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai managed to escape Yerushalayim when there was tremendous famine in Yerushalayim, when people were starving and they had to reach outside of the walls of Yerushalayim when they were under siege. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai faked his own death, and he managed to get outside of the walls of the city, and he impressed the general through an interesting conversation where he told him that he is going to become the next king, or that he is already the next king, because we have a haftacha from the Navi that Hashem would never let Yerushalayim fall in the hands of anyone who's not a king. And the general was so impressed, Vespasian was so impressed, that he offered him 3 wishes. He offered him, ask me whatever it is that you would want for the Jewish people to have. And it's very interesting, the Chazal are not sure whether he did the right thing, because he didn't ask to just stop the Churban, to not destroy the Beis Hamikdash, to save the Beis Hamikdash. And the reason he didn't ask that was because he thought that it wouldn't be granted. He thought that request wasn't going to work. So he made 3 more modest requests. The first request that he made was Tein li Yavne v'chachamecha, that allow for the yeshiva to continue, allow for Yavne. The yeshiva was called Kerem b'Yavne because the Rabbanim used to sit in rows like a vineyard, in neat rows of Talmidei Chachamim. So he said, allow for Torah to continue, because Torah certainly is going to be our key to get through all the long years of Galus. So just allow for Yavne v'chachamecha. And that's an obvious request, because of course Klal Yisrael can't survive without Torah. It doesn't make any sense that a nation should be able to survive thousands of years out of its native land. Most other nations, when they're exiled from their land, it's a generation, 2 generations, where they retain some remnant of the culture of what their land was, but ultimately it just falls away. Ultimately they become completely absorbed into whatever society they go to next. But for Klal Yisrael, it hasn't been that way. For Klal Yisrael, we retain a unique identity, and it's not only because of anti-Semitism. It's also because we have this commitment to Torah. We have this connection to Torah. So it was really an obvious request to ask for Yavne v'chachameha. But what I want to focus on is the other 2 requests that he made that seem a little bit different. One thing he said is, I need a doctor for Rabbi Tzadok, that I need a medical professional to take care of Rabbi Tzadok. And then the other thing that he requested is Shushiltu de Rabbi Gamliel, that the family of the Nasi, the family of Rabbi Gamliel, should remain intact, that their yichus, their heritage, their lineage should continue, and that they should remain unharmed. Now, of all the things in the world that he could have asked for, what's so special about a special physician specifically for Rabbi Tzadok and specifically for the family of Rabbi Gamliel to continue to survive? So in order to answer that question of why it is that he requested these 2 things, I think it's important to take a look at a halacha. This is normally a halacha program, so there's a halacha that we're allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av, because there is a halacha called making a zecher l'churban. The concept of a zecher l'churban is that throughout all the years of Galus, and this was spearheaded by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, according to the Mishnayos in Masechah Sukkah, Masechah Rosh Hashanah, that right after the Churban Bais, he realized that there was a tremendous need for the Jewish people not to forget the Beis Hamikdash, that we should always keep in mind that there's going to be a Beis Hamikdash again in the future. And therefore, he set up a whole system of halachos through which we remember the Beis Hamikdash. For example, it used to be in the times of the Beis Hamikdash that we would only take lulav for 1 day anywhere but Yerushalayim, anywhere but the old city, the Makom Hamikdash. But in the Makom Hamikdash we would take lulav for 7 days. Once we didn't have a Makom Hamikdash anymore, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made a takana that we should take lulav even b'Medina, even outside of Yerushalayim, for all 7 days. Why? Zecher l'Mikdash. We should remember the Beis Hamikdash. And the Gemara says that the reason Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai realized this was so important, the motivation of doing this, was that there's a pasuk. The pasuk says, Tzion hi doresh ein la. The Navi Yirmiyahu laments how no one is being doresh Tzion. No one is looking for, seeking out Zion. No one is looking for Yerushalayim, and that's a lament, and that's sad. And the halacha is that one is supposed to mechlal debayi drisha, the Gemara says. We see from there that it requires drisha. We need to seek out Yerushalayim. We need to look for a way to remember Yerushalayim. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made a series of takanos through which we remember Yerushalayim. But then there's another Gemara that also talks about Zecher Hamikdash, but oddly it quotes an entirely different pasuk, and not only an entirely different pasuk, it doesn't even quote any of the same examples of Zecher Hamikdash that we have in that Gemara Sukkah Daf Mem Aleph. The other Gemara appears on the last daf of the third parak of Maseches Baba Basra, and the Gemara tells us a brisa that after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, Rabu Prushin Yisrael Shalol Lechel Basar v'Shalol Lishtos Yayin. That people decided that the only way to mourn properly is to not eat meat and not drink any wine. Because after all, they said that the Mizbeach is no longer going to have the meat of karbanos being brought on it. It's no longer going to have the nesachim of the yayin, of the wine, poured on it. So why should we enjoy something that the Mizbeach doesn't enjoy? So the Gemara says, Nitpala hen Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yoshua heard about this plan, and he said to them, Banai, why is it that you're not eating meat and drinking wine? And they said, well, we can't bring ourselves to do it if the Mizbeach doesn't get to have meat and wine. So he said, I see where you're coming from, but if that's the case, then lechem lo nochal. We shouldn't eat bread either. Shekvar batlu menachos, because karban mincha was made from flour and water and oil, same ingredients as bread, and it was baked very often as a bread or fried as a bread. So you shouldn't be able to have any bread products either. So I said, you're right, we won't have that either. We won't have bread either. So he said, but then peros lo nochal, you shouldn't eat fruits either, because they used to bring bikurim, the first fruits, every year to Yerushalayim, to the Mizbeach, and you're not going to be able to eat fruits either. So they said, that's okay, efshar beperos achrini, that bikurim is only the 7 fruits that Eretz Yisrael is praised with. Apples, oranges, plums, pears, peaches, we could survive on other fruits. There are other fruits that we'll be able to eat. Then he said to them, but if really you're going to follow this to its logical conclusion, mayim lo nishte, you're not going to be able to drink water rather, because there was nisach hamayim, there was pouring of the water as a major part of what we did on Sukkot in the Beis Hamikdash. So what are you going to do without water? You're not going to be able to drink water. So they gave up, and they said, you're right. We don't know what to do. How are we supposed to mourn? What should we be doing? They were at a loss. They realized that this logic of not eating meat and not drinking wine is not going to work, that it's not going to happen, because if they were to follow it to its logical conclusion, they wouldn't be able to eat or drink anything. Just parenthetically, Mori Rabbi Rav Shachter points out that the minhag of not eating meat and drinking wine during the 9 days is probably based on this Gemara. People often make the mistake and say, oh, it's a halacha of Avelus that we don't eat meat and drink wine. That's not at all true. There is no such halacha in Avelus that one is not allowed to eat meat and drink wine. There's a halacha in Onein is not allowed to eat meat and drink wine. But in Avel, the Gemara in Eruvin says, Lo nivra yayin ela l'nachim ba'as avelim, that wine was created specifically for the purpose of Nicham Avelim. It's meant for an Avel. We don't eat meat and drink wine during the 9 days, Ashkenazim at least during the 9 days, and Sephardim during the week of Tisha B'Av, probably based on this Gemara, because that was the initial reaction of the Jewish community at the time, to refrain from that which we most closely associate with the Mizbeach. So these people were at a loss. They said, so what should we do? So Rabbi Yeshua says, I'll tell you what to do. We should make what's called a Zecher L'Churban. How do you make a Zecher L'Churban? When you build a house, prepare the whole house and plaster the whole thing, except leave out 1 amma by 1 amma across from the door that remains unfinished. And then through that unfinished part that you see every time you walk in and out of the house, you'll remember that there was a Beis Hamikdash. When you set a table, leave off a little something. When a woman makes her jewelry up, leave off a little something so that people will remember that there was a Beis Hamikdash. And that way we'll have a proper Zecher L'Mikdash. And the Gemara continues, and the Gemara says, how do I know that we're supposed to make a Zecher L'Mikdash, that we're supposed to have something to remind us of the Beis Hamikdash? And the Gemara says, oh, it's a pasuk. So now, knowing the Gemara in Sukkah, you expect to know which pasuk we're going to quote. That we're going to quote the pasuk of Tzion hi doresh ein la, that there's no one being doresh Tzion, and that by Drisha, someone needs to seek after and to look for Tzion. But that's not the pasuk the Gemara quotes. Instead, the Gemara quotes an entirely different pasuk. Im eshkachech Yerushalayim tishkach yemini tidvak leshoni lechiki. That how dare we forget Yerushalayim? If I were to ever forget the Jerusalem, we have a whole different pasuk to remind us that we're not supposed to forget Yerushalayim. In fact, the Gemara says that one of the things we do as a Zecher L'Mikdash is when a Chassan and Kala get married, we put Efer Makla al Rosh Chassanim. We put a little bit of ashes on the head of the Chassan, right in the spot where he normally puts his tefillin, as a way of reminding him that even in this time of great Simcha, we're still mourning the loss of the Beis Hamikdash. And the question is obvious. Two different Gemaras, one in Sukkah Daf Mem Aleph, one in Baba Basra Daf Samach, that both talk about making a Zeichel HaMikdash, but they have totally different examples of Zeichel HaMikdash, Zeichel HaChurban, and not only do they have totally different examples, they have different psukim to teach the din of making a Zeichel HaChurban. So what are we to make of that? Normally you don't have two psukim to teach the same halacha. So there's an idea that I heard in the name of Rav Soloveitchik, but then I saw that also Rav Asher Weiss, who I just heard on the Headlines program last week, Rav Asher Weiss also has the same idea with all of the same rayos. So you know that, and it resonates as emes, it resonates as truth, that this is amito shel Torah. I'm very confident that this is the correct pshat in understanding both of these sugyas, where both of these great gedolim suggest the following, that there's, even though the Gemara uses the same term, Zecher l'churban, in both places, sometimes you'll have a term in Shas that the same words appear in two different places, but they mean two different things. The most famous example is probably the word chazaka. The word chazaka in Shas appears in different places. It actually means 5 different things throughout all of Shas. Well, over here, the term Zecher l'churban is used in both places, but the way Rav Soloveitchik formulated it is that really one of these halachos is a Zecher l'churban, and the other one is a Zecher l'mikdash. The Gemara in Baba Basra that tells us about the Amma by an Amma that should remain unfinished in our homes, that tells us about the unfinished jewelry, that tells us about the ashes on the head of a chassan, that Gemara is talking about remembering the terrible event of the Churban, mourning the terrible Churban. The Gemara in Masechah Sukkah that talks about taking lulav for all 7 days, or about how on the second day of Pesach we're still going to not eat the new grains, Chadash is going to remain Aser as a Zeichel HaMikdash. All of these other halachos that we have as a Zeichel HaMikdash, that's not a Zeichel HaChurban. These aren't halachos that are about blowing shofar on Shabbos in a place that has a Beis Din, all the different examples that are brought over there. These aren't examples of remembering the Churban of Bais, of remembering the terrible destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. This is Zeichel HaMikdash. This is remembering the glory of the Beis Hamikdash, remembering how great the Beis Hamikdash was, remembering the Beis Hamikdash in all of its majesty. And that's the spark we're trying to keep alive, not just to mourn, but to remember what it was actually like, to see the grandeur of it all in our mind's eye and keep it in our hearts. And that's why there are two different psukim. One is to be Doresh Tzion in a positive way, and the other is Im Eshkachech Yerushalayim, not to forget about the Churban. I think that maybe that's what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was asking for when he made those last two requests. He was saying, give me a doctor for Rabbi Tzadok. Why did Rabbi Tzadok need a doctor? Because the Gemara explains in Maseches Gittin, Rabbi Tzadok was very ill because he fasted for 40 years because of the impending Churban. He was mourning the Churban before it even happened because he knew it was going to happen. So he was in very frail health, and he needed some help. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was saying, let's keep alive this picture, this image of what it means to mourn, of what it means to suffer from the loss of the Beis Hamikdash. Give me a doctor for Rabbi Tzadok. But then he said, as much as it's important to mourn and it's important to realize the magnitude of our loss, we also have to realize how great it was and how great it will once again be. We have to remember how great the Beis Hamikdash is. How do we remember the greatness and the glory of the Beis Hamikdash? Give me Shushilta de Rabban Gamliel. I want to keep the family of the Nasi, of Jewish leadership, when Klal Yisrael was in Eretz Yisrael, with Yerushalayim as its capital, and the Makom Hamikdash and the Hashras HaShechina, and everything that was happening with the Malchus Beis David, with everyone. I want to keep that alive, keep that image of what the Jewish people, when everything is clicking on all cylinders, when everything is going well, keep that image in our minds. We don't even remember what it means to bring a Korban Pesach anymore. We don't experience any of the Yom Tovim anymore the way they were meant to be. We've never seen a Kohen Gadol come out of the Kodesh HaKadoshim on Yom Kippurim. We think we have a Yom Kippur experience, but it's a shell of the original Yom Kippur experience. We have to remember the positive and how wonderful it was, and what it is that we're searching for, what it is that we're hoping for. I think that's the avoda of Tisha B'Av. Certainly, Tein Liyavna v'chachameha. We always have to keep Torah alive. We always have to remember that our dedication to Torah is paramount if we're going to survive any Galus. But if we're going to relate properly to the Beis Hamikdash, we need to have a remembrance for Rabbi Tzadok. We need to know what it means to mourn, what it means to suffer through an Avelus because of the terrible Churban that happened and all of the Churbanos that happened since then in Jewish history. And we also need to keep alive the Shushilta de Rabban Gamliel. Need to remember the majesty and the glory of the Beis Hamikdash, because we're not mourning something that's lost forever. We're mourning something that's going to one day return. And Amir Hashem, by the time this plays on the radio, we should already have been zocheh to the return of that Beis Hamikdash, and the mourning should stop, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu should bring back His great glory to Yerushalayim Yer HaKodesh.